Welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most extravagant curiosities of 20th century warfare, the Schwerer Gustav. Listen, this was not just a gun. It was an industrial cathedral of steel rolled onto rails. Over the next hour, over the next several minutes, you and I will peel back why Germany built something that, on paper, reads like a parable of military hubris. Wow. Let's begin with the engineering marvel itself. The Gustav weighed roughly 1,300 tons. The ammunition it fired, shells that weighed on the order of 7 tons apiece. The caliber was massive, an 80-centimeter bore, and the project was commissioned and manufactured by Krupp, the great German armaments firm. To move and fire this thing, you needed specially laid railroad tracks, huge reinforced platforms, cranes, transport wagons, and a battalion of engineers. The barrel alone was huge. The carriages and mounting hardware required entire trains to accompany it. Think about that. A single artillery piece that needed a logistical tail resembling a small division. Imagine the scale. The railway logistics were not incidental. They were part of the design. Gustav couldn't simply be loaded onto a flatbed and driven down a road. It required parallel spurs, strengthened sleepers, and dozens of rail cars to bring sections and supplies. To assemble it in the field, you needed weeks, sometimes months of construction, a pool of machinists and fitters, heavy cranes to lift the subassemblies, and specialized stores for shells and propellant. The operational tempo was painfully slow. Emplacement was a campaign in miniature. And while Gustav could lob enormous projectiles, every kilometer it moved ate fuel, manpower, and time. The scene. This is an audio episode about the Schwerer Gustav railway gun for history enthusiasts, military technology hobbyists, and listeners of documentary-style podcasts. The conversation is already underway. The previous line was, "Lob enormous projectiles. Every kilometer it moved ate fuel, manpower, and time." Now, why build it? The motivation sits at the junction of ego, industrial might, and strategic spectacle. Hitler and several of his advisors were deeply enamored of what they called Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons. These were meant to be technological trump cards, visible proof that German engineering could deliver decisive, almost magical solutions. The Gustav fit that narrative perfectly, a colossal demonstrator of power. But if you push past cinematic imagery, you find strategic madness. Instead of investing in versatile, mobile artillery, armored divisions, logistics, or air power that could have been used across multiple fronts, resources were poured into a single, specialized behemoth. You see the problem. The marginal return on investment was tiny compared to the cost. Right. The gun did see combat, most notably at Sevastopol in 1942. There it was employed against fortified positions, bunkers, and coastal defenses. Reports indicate that Gustav was capable of destroying reinforced concrete installations that smaller calibers could not, and the psychological effect on defenders was significant. But the reality of deployment undercut the myth. Rate of fire was low. Each shot required careful preparation, and barrel wear demanded periodic refurbishment. More importantly, the gun's vulnerability and the sheer effort needed to protect and supply it limited how and where it could be used. Its presence did not turn the strategic balance. It helped in a single siege, but it could not be redeployed rapidly to influence campaigns elsewhere. The logistical nightmare deserves emphasis. Gustav needed an armored train of support, anti-aircraft cover, and a dedicated supply chain for those 7-ton shells. Each shell had to be transported, handled with giant cranes, and emplaced on the loading trolley. The gun was a fixed target while firing. It required a cleared zone and was susceptible to air reconnaissance and interdiction. As the Allies gained air superiority later in the war, such fixed, immobile assets became increasingly untenable. Maintenance was another Achilles heel. Barrel replacements, machining tolerances, and the simple wear of firing monstrous charges meant constant specialized work. So you had a weapon that burned manpower and industrial capacity while offering only sporadic tactical payoff. In the end, what of the legacy? By late stages of the war, as fronts collapsed and mobility mattered more than spectacle, the fate of Gustav was sealed. It would eventually be destroyed, scuttled or rendered inoperable as German forces retreated, a deliberate denial to the advancing enemy. That physical destruction, though, is only the symbolic end. The true legacy is a cautionary tale about limits of industrial production, limits of strategic imagination, and limits of hubris. The Schwerer Gustav is often invoked now as the archetype of a weapon that was technically impressive but strategically marginal. You know what I mean. The Schwerer Gustav railway gun was an archetype of a weapon that was technically impressive but strategically marginal. There are a few concrete lessons for students of military history and technology. First, size is not a substitute for flexibility. Gustav was devastating against certain fortifications, but modern warfare rewards adaptability and sustained supply lines, not one-off spectacles. Second, the opportunity cost matters. The steel, man-hours, and rail capacity devoted to Gustav could have supported many smaller, more versatile systems. Third, psychological effect has limits. Awe plays a role on the battlefield, yes, but awe without operational utility cannot win wars. And finally, vulnerability to changing conditions, especially air power and rapid maneuver warfare, can render a marvel obsolete almost overnight. There is, too, a moral dimension. When national leadership treats engineering as theater rather than tool, the consequences ripple beyond tanks and guns. They touch logistics, civilian economies, and ultimately lives. So, as we wrap up, the Schwerer Gustav remains a monument not to military genius, but to a certain kind of strategic vanity. It demonstrates how industrial capability, when untethered from sound military doctrine, can produce wonders that impress but do not deliver. Remember that when we marshal facts about weapons and their impact. The curiosity is worth studying, not because it was effective at changing history, but because it shows the ways in which technology can seduce decision-makers into false confidence. Thank you for listening. If you have questions, observations, or contrary takes, write in. We'll examine them on a future episode. Until then, stay wary of the difference between impressive and important.